All right, so this is our final project. We're going to be making three-dimensional sculptures out of flat two-dimensional surfaces or materials. We're going to be using one of the two methods I'm going to introduce tonight. You get to choose. And we'll be using one of the four material options you'll get to choose, and I will introduce them. Make sure that you have those materials ready to go by next class, because we only have about 7 class sessions to finish these, and they can be pretty time consuming. So our two methods are either flats or stacks, and the four material choices are paper, cardboard, foam board, or wood. So a flat versus a stack. We look at the option on the left. These are made from cardboard, and they are hinged together with buttons, and they are hanging on the wall. And they're um, three different stacks of cardboard combined together to create the illusion of depth. But they're still pretty flat, right? They're still pretty two-dimensional. So even though this is a kind of painterly drawing example, you're still going to be using three-dimensional building principles to design, cut, and assemble these flat sculptures. The second option on the right is a stack, right? These are layers, sliced layers that are stacked together to create a three-dimensional object. Have you ever seen like a topographical map? It's very similar, right? Everything's kind of layering like a cake. This is a really cool option made of wood. It's almost like a diorama. It's kind of like a triptych. It has multiple parts, multiple layers, but they're all made out of flat material. There are wall hanging options, so yours can hang off the wall. Um, Pros of that is that it's an easy option. You have to make fewer cuts. The cons would be that you have to have at least 3 slice layers, so you can't just make one slice layer and call it a day. It has to have 3 layers that stack together, and it does require pretty decent knowledge of drawing and painting and color theory. One tip if you're doing a wall hanging or freestanding, if you want things to be able to move or open up, you want to use hinges like you see on doors and cabinets, or brads. Brads you've probably seen in elementary school. They're kind of a way of slipping this little tool through a hole, and then you bind it, and that allows you to move and shift your objects. So this is another great example of a hanging flat. So these are all flat objects made from cardboard, and they are painted after being cut, and then they are hanging from string. And it creates this kind of layered effect, like you're looking at things that are in the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. So it kind of creates this installation and this kind of scenery. I like that they chose to keep the string highly visible, but you can use fishing line if you want this to be invisible. There's also the freestanding option. So we can see these kind of layers, foreground, middle ground, and background. They're stacked in a way where they're being laid out on the floor, right? They're freestanding, they're not hanging. And a tip for that is any kind of freestanding flat is going to need a supportive backing, the same way a bike needs a kickstand, right? Anytime you've seen props in theater, or even in merchandising, like if you've ever seen a cardboard cutout, it's going to have some kind of, or like a picture frame, it's going to have some kind of stand on the backside, keeping it supported. Another good example, freestanding. This person actually incorporates the kickstand, the backing, as part of the imagery. And this is the same artist. It shows those freestanding objects, but they're creating an installation where they can take up a lot of space and work together as a unified piece. Another option for working with those flats is to create a tunnel theater. For this, paper and cardboard are ideal. If you're working with wood, it requires a lot more cutting, takes a lot more time, and you can't get quite as intricate of cuts. But what I like about this is that you can have this kind of diorama effect where things are layered and stacked, and they're all kind of contained in one little box. So this is a really beautiful example of old school tunnel theaters where you're making them out of paper. Sometimes they're printed, sometimes it's hand painted, but it creates this kind of layered effect where you're kind of forcing someone's perspective to look at something two-dimensional in a way that's layered in a way that makes it look three-dimensional. So you're kind of looking at a stage setting. And that's why they're called tunnel theaters, meant to look like a little theater stage. This is the only method that you're allowed to use paper for. So if you are like, I really want to work in paper, you're going to be creating something like this tunnel theater. But you're welcome to make the tunnel theater out of cardboard or out of foam as well. Wood, it's an option, but it will take a lot longer. And you'd have to make it bigger. Okay, so those are flats, right? Everything that we've seen here is basically flat. And it's kind of like looking at a cardboard cutout, right? You're really focusing on the silhouette of something. Whereas with a laminated stack, lamination is kind of the technical term for this. It basically just means you are layering your slices in a way that they change form so that they can take on this kind of three-dimensional look. It looks like a topographical drawing of a mountain. These are some model examples. I found these on Etsy, and you can see the Batman skull is kind of divided into multiple slices, and then they're all compiled together one at a time. They're clearly labeled by number, so you know which order they're supposed to go into. And then you basically create this 3D puzzle. Another really good example. And I like this one because I can tell it's cut by hand. So it's been cut with a X-Acto blade. It has a slightly rougher kind of surface to it. These are made with a CNC or laser cutter. So everything has been cut by a very fine laser. And this is a really good option too. You can work with Taj if you want to do a computer rendering. But my dream and goal for you guys is that you actually have to design it and cut it all by hand. So the pros of this is it looks really good without having to paint it. The cons is that it's a really intricate setup and process. So the construction time can take a long time and you need patience. So you kind of have to be a skillful builder and you have to be a patient constructor. You can make this out of wood as well. The problem with doing it in wood, something like this lion, this is, I would say, at least 56 pieces. And each one of these pieces has a lot of intricate cuts to it. So if you are cutting this by hand on like the bandsaw, it's going to take a really, really long time. And that means only a couple people are going to be able to work with wood cutting the bandsaw. So if you're working with wood, I would actually recommend you do one of the flats projects instead. If you're working with the lamination technique, the stacks, I recommend working in cardboard or foam because foam is thicker. So you'll be able to work with fewer layers and fewer slices than if you're working with wood. So if you are going to work with wood, it can be kind of expensive. It's a lot easier to work with if you're using a thinner, softer wood. That makes it easier to cut, and you can cut a little bit quicker. Um, but you do have to cut using a machine, which I'm going to train people on if they want to do that option. This is, again, a really good example. This is what those sliced uh, objects look like when they are sliced up. This is kind of like the topographical map, right? This is your back piece. Then the next one adds up to the neck, to the rest of the head, and then all the way down to the tip of the nose. You can make these abstract if you are working in wood and you're doing stacks. This might be a best option for you because you don't have to make as many different slices. You can kind of be a little bit more free form with it. Okay, so then if you're working with this stacked slice option and you're using foam, foam is great. It's pretty inexpensive. You can buy a pretty large sheet for somewhere around 13 bucks. And they're usually like 6 feet long and about 4 feet wide. So you can get a lot of mileage out of that. Um, the only issue is that it is pretty toxic when you're cutting into it. So you definitely want to bring a face mask. I use like a full respirator because I like to be extra careful with my lungs, especially if I'm using the hot wire cutter, which I will demo next class. But the hot wire cutter is great for getting really clean, smooth, curved cuts. You can also cut using just a serrated blade or using the bandsaw. It's just a little bit messier. So it's a little cleaner if you're cutting with a hot wire cutter and quicker and easier to get nice curved edges. This is a great example. This is the stack. It has all the numbers on it. That's how you keep things in order. So you know where your first stack is and where every step up goes. This one was held together by the doweling method. So as you're stacking them, you basically drill holes through it, and then you have these kind of dowels supporting the whole thing. So one method I like to show for how to create these slices is you first start by building the object in clay, slice the object, organize your slices, resize the slices on paper, trace the resized slices on the material of your choosing. If you're going to be using cardboard or wood or foam, you cut out the slices on that material and then you stack them using either that dowel method we just looked at, right? These are the dowels, or using glue. And we'll talk about what the best glue is for this project. So I started off with a very simple object, right? This is my little clay object. I made a rabbit, if you can't tell. And you want to wait until your object is somewhere between plastic soft and leather hard before you start slicing it up. A little video, I will speed through it. So I'm basically slicing it one layer at a time. You can use your wire cutting tool that we had in our clay kits to do this. I just happened to be at home and did not have mine, and I have a nice dull butcher knife, and I trust that I won't cut my fingers. So I've been doing this long enough that I don't have to worry about that. But if you are worried about that, obviously wear gloves to protect your fingers. Maybe use a slightly duller knife, and your wire cutting tool will also work pretty well. But you have to be careful not to smush or mush your little shape as you're going. So you want to go slow and carefully. And as you can see, I've already drawn out all of the different slices before I started cutting. Yes. So once I have sliced my rabbit all the way down, every time I was making a slice, I was placing it on a sheet of paper so that I could keep them organized in the same order that I cut them. So like this is the top ear, and then it goes all the way down from the top of the ears to the top of the head, to the middle of the head, to the tops of the shoulders, to the base layers. And then I always keep things like the ears separated from each other. I kept the tops of the paws separated from each other, and I kept the tails separated from each other. And I numbered everything in descending order, right? Because I know that number one is going to be the bottom, and then I'm going to stack everything going up. So this is how you slice them, organize them, and then trace them. And then if you are going to resize your slices so that, let's say my first rabbit was only, you know, he's only like 4 inches tall. Let's say I want him to be twice as big as that. Then I'm going to, when I'm tracing out all of these shapes, I'm going to double their size. So once you have traced these and resized them, then you're going to trace that paper, cut out the paper and trace it onto whatever material surface you're going for. So if I were making mine out of foam, I would trace the resized paper cutouts onto the foam. And the reason you want to enlarge it is because it's pretty hard to make those cuts accurately when they're really small. So this is a really good example. If you look at how thick this foam is, we can see that we can construct a pretty believable object only using, I'd say, 8 layers, versus if we're working in cardboard, cardboard is really thin, you'd have to probably triple that. So instead of just having 8 layers, you'd have 24 layers, maybe even more. And I'll show you an example. I have a little cardboard bear that I made, and I'll show you guys in person. And this is a good example too. The fewer slices you use, the more blocky it's going to look. So if you're using pretty thick foam board, it's great because you can get it to be bigger faster and with fewer slices, but it will have a slightly blockier look, which can look really cool, right? Just depends on what you're going for. Something as intricate as this copy of the David is going to obviously involve probably hundreds of little individual foam slices. So plan for how long you want this to take. How intricate do you want it to be? How simple do you want it to be? Do you want something that's a little bit more abstract and something that's a little bit more literal? And then plan your materials and your time with that in mind. Again, this is an example of the assembly, so you can kind of see it in action. This is obviously going to be a bear. All of these little individual slices are getting layered on using the dowel method. If you were working with foam and you don't want to do the dowel method, Gorilla Glue is pretty much the only glue that works to seal foam to itself. If you try to use hot glue, the hot glue is just going to burn through the foam and it won't stick at all. You can have some luck with white school glue, but you really have to combine the dowel method and the white school glue. Gorilla Glue is great. It's just kind of expensive. If you don't trust yourself to make this, freehand drawing version where you're cutting it open using the clay, or just doing a freehand like assemblage together, you can find 3D models online. You can also use any kind of software to create these 3D options. I'm more than happy to show you how it would look. So I have this short little tutorial. I'm just going to flip through it because you can just click on this link. It will be in Canvas. Who are like, well, that's too many steps to make it out of play. You can also find these 3D objects on the internet. And they're pretty complex. So I like to find some objects that are pretty simple and easy to recreate. And most of them are free. So I just typed in the search STL. STL is the type of file. And then I would say free. So once I select the object I want, I can download the file as an STL. In this case, it takes me a really long time on my computer. So I already pre-downloaded a different file as an STL, and it was this little bear. And I uploaded it into Slicer, which is part of Fusion 360, which is part of Autodesk, which they're not running anymore the way that they used to. So you can still use this service, but it has a few bugs that didn't get updated. But what's cool about this is I can manipulate this box up in the right-hand corner, and it will show me kind of all the different angles of the object. It's kind of this viewpoint where I can see it from every edge. And then for my construction technique, I will just select stacked slices. And what it has done for me is automatically divide the bear into a bunch of different little slices, the same way we had before. So now I can see this bear in all these little individual slices. Sometimes I can get the plan and it will show me the layout, and it will give me all of those nice visuals of what the slices look like. Sometimes that is not the case because this is an old model. And I'm more than happy to walk through this with you all if you don't feel like using the clay method, which I totally understand. So we can find you a pre-made object. We can divide it into all of its individual slices. So I'm just going to select assembly sets. And what it's done is converted it into basically like a cardboard object. And if I move these steps around, it's going to basically remove the little slices of cardboard and show me how this bear looks slice by slice. And if I rotate it, I can kind of see what that side profile looks like. So this is what you're tracing essentially. And if I go all the way to the beginning, that's my first little part that I'm trying to reconstruct. That's what my second one looks like. Ear, part of the body, part of the ear, part of the body, part of the ear, part of the body, part of the head and the ear, part of the body, part of the head and the ear, part of the body. And it will just keep showing me these little stacks one by one. And when I was creating my bear, my little cardboard bear version of this, I literally just freehand drew each of those shapes, which took me a really long time because you're starting off with these very flat slices. There are 42 different slices. So the whole thing took me about 3 hours because I had to freehand copy what I was looking at. Right? If I was looking at this shape right here, this kind of peanut shape with a little bit of a snout and some stump for the leg, I had to freehand draw that, and then I also had to cut it out with my X-Acto blade. It does take a very long time. But yeah, you can. Okay, so hopefully that can shed some light on the internet option. If you would like to do a little bit more of like a digital version, we can download the digital file and we can access what that 3D model looks like so we can see it in individual slices. In some cases, you can print it out, not every case. So you might end up having to do that freehand draw copy version. There is also the option, Etsy has tons of these like 3D puzzles, and they'll come with a printout plan. It usually comes as a download file. So you can enlarge those and you can make your own. So that is basically your project in a nutshell, right? You can do either the flats or the stacks. Your stacked option obviously is a little bit more involved. It involves a lot of layers, a lot of extra work, but they do come out looking pretty amazing. And it's a really unique approach that you might not have normally considered for sculpture. Again, if you want to do it in an abstract option, that's also a really fun way to explore. That's a little bit less restraint as having to work with something that looks really literal. And then your flats option, right? You're working with two-dimensional flat surfaces and you're kind of trying to create these more cardboard cutout silhouette style options. All right, so hopefully that gives you a place to jump off from, at least the knowledge of what kind of material you would like to work with, and we'll talk more next class.